I think we are good to go. And the next speaker is Rich. He created Svelte, another JavaScript framework. He worked previously at The Guardian and also New York Times, and now works full-time on open source at Vercel and building Svelte. And the cool thing is that Svelte will reach its next major version probably in the next days. I don't know. And yeah, we have now Rich here to tell us more. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a confession to make. It's up on the screen. I don't really have a presentation, unlike Mishko. And the reason for that is that I've been very busy lately, working very long hours, burning the midnight oil, all in service of a deadline that is coming up very, very soon, more on which later. The other day, my boss gave some advice, which I think is very good. If you need to come up with a presentation in a short period of time, then tell the story of me, the story of us, and the story of now. So with your indulgence, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to give you a little bit of personal history, and then I'll give you a bit of history of Svelte, the project, and then I'm going to talk about what the new stuff is that's coming out that we're so excited about. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Fabian, for hosting, and for Pace for making this possible. I didn't really know anything about Pace University prior to this, except that it was a filming location for the 2016 Todd Solondz film Wiener Dog. And the reason that I know that is because I used to work around the corner, and one day our team was out for lunch and we were walking past the steps at the main building, and there was a film crew there. And, you know, it was the full Monty. We had like the camera people and the sound people and the caterers and the makeup artists. And, you know, we're New Yorkers, so we're cool. You don't want to make a big fuss. It's like, this is the thing that happens here. But still, you're going to be like, oh, am I going to see Timothy Chalamet or Meryl Streep or something? And we kind of craned our necks to see what this big fuss was about. And it was this tiny little dachshund, which is the star of the film Wiener Dog. Also starring Danny DeVito. It's a terrible film. I don't recommend you watch it, but I'm happy that I was finally able to climb the same stairs that the Dachshund came down. It's kind of like Rocky going up the Museum of Art steps in Philadelphia. So I, unlike a lot of you, I don't have the benefit of a computer science education. I grew up in the north of England, and I was kind of techie, I guess, but I didn't really think of myself as much of a computer person. If anything, the person that I aspired to be when I grew up was Tintin, the Belgian cartoon reporter, or as the Belgians say, Tintin. He's this kind of an intrepid investigative journalist who's always doing heroic deeds and exposing wrongdoing, and it seemed like kind of a fun thing to do. And so journalism is where I found my home. Initially. The difference between journalism today and journalism in the 20th century when Tintin was practicing is that there's no money in it anymore. It's a shit business. And so when I was looking for a job straight out of college, the subprime mortgage crisis was gathering steam. And so within a few months of me starting my career, the whole economy blew up, and about half of my colleagues got laid off, and the only reason they didn't fire me was because my salary was small enough that it was no point. But it was kind of a wake-up call. Like, I got to make myself employable, and so that's how I started to get into more technical fields. I was like, oh, this is a way to get a little bit of job security and also do a more interesting job. And what I very quickly found is that building stuff on the web is super hard. Like making interactive, reactive visualizations, which was what I was trying to do, really, really difficult, because you've got to coordinate all of this state and interaction, and you've got to do it on slow devices where you don't know the screen size, and it's just really, really hard. And so that led to the creation of Svelte, which is designed to make all of this stuff a little bit easier. In 2017, I joined the New York Times, and that is where I really started working on Svelte in earnest. This is a story that I worked on when I was on the investigations team at the New York Times some years ago. It's a story about how people buy influence online, specifically Twitter followers, Instagram followers, things like that. There's a a girl here called Jess Reichley. This was a Twitter account. The original is on the left and the fake one is on the right. Because people were harvesting Twitter accounts en masse, copying them, and then using them to tweet out garbage, basically. And then these accounts would follow people who had paid for the followers. And telling these stories in text is difficult. Like, you need to kind of show stuff. And so Svelte is designed essentially to solve that problem. How do you, in a newsroom, deadline-driven environment, build visualizations that will work on mobile devices and everywhere else, in a way that tells a story that would be difficult to tell otherwise. And so there's all of these visualizations. They're all Svelte. I think this is one of my favorite parts. We excuse me. We scraped some data from Twitter using the API. We actually had to create some bots of our own in order to do the scraping because of API rate limits. Eventually, Twitter cottoned onto us and sent us a nasty letter asking us to stop. But before they did that, we managed to collect all this data, showing that you can actually tell quite clearly that there's all this artificial activity that happens when you buy fake followers, when you buy fake influence. And in the process of doing these visualizations and showing that it's possible to do this with publicly accessible data, kind of embarrassing for Twitter, and they ended up having to take it down. Perhaps more embarrassing is the fact that one of the people who we caught doing this was a Twitter board member called Martha Lane Fox. I mention this because in addition to doing the graphics in Svelte, we needed to do a lot of the reporting using digital techniques as well. And so, for example, building the app that scraped all this data, we needed an application framework to build that in. Also, the reporter that I was working with got a hard drive in the mail one day, and he kind of handed it to me and said, like, the source gave me this, like, can we see what's on it? And I kind of took it as if it was radioactive because, like, for all we knew, it was malware that was designed to infiltrate the New York Times intranet and install a backdoor or something. But we, kind of firewalled it and poked around. It was a WordPress site. And say what you will about WordPress, and a lot of people have got a lot of things to say about WordPress these days. But a really nice thing about WordPress is that it's got all of the application itself and all of the data is just like one big directory, and with some low-grade black hat trickery, you can reset the admin password and get all of that data. And so we had access to some company records, but then we needed to make that accessible to the people who were reporting this out. And so again, we had a need to build tooling for reporters to work with this information, and so that we could start finding some of these some of the people that are in this data. Like James Cracknell, the Olympic rower, was one of the people who was in this database, along with 70,000 other people. And so Svelte by itself doesn't really help with a lot of this. We needed an application framework to go with it. And so that led to the creation of the predecessor of what is now known as SvelteKit. And so while I was working at the New York Times, working on stories like these, I was building the application framework that would allow us to do some of that work. And that project eventually didn't go anywhere. It was built on Webpack, and it was like very much tied to node servers at a time when people were starting to use Cloudflare workers and Dino and other things. And so it wasn't really the future of anything, but it led to the creation of what is now known as SvelteKit, which is the full stack application framework that goes with Svelte. So we were building this, I think in like 2019, we started working on this. And then in March 2020, the world shut down, and I was at this point working on the graphics desk at the New York Times, and we needed to start showing people coronavirus data. And because we knew that a lot of people needed access to this information, we had certain requirements for how we were going to present it. We couldn't have JavaScript presenting this data. Like, it needed to load quickly. It needed to be progressively enhanced. Like all of these other things, it needed to be a small application. Also, it needed to fit inside an article page on the New York Times using a content management system that is really not designed for this stuff. And so my bosses said, like, Rich, do we know how to do that? And I said, well, I have this side project that I've been working on. It's not like ready or anything, but I think it's the thing that best matches our requirements, given that we already have some of our code written in Svelte. And so they were like, all right, yeah, whatever. Try that. And so that is how it came to be that the first application, the first production application built in SvelteKit, long before SvelteKit was stable or even good, had hundreds of millions of users. That's the kind of tomfoolery that you can get away with in the news business. They don't let you do that in most engineering teams, but in the news, like you can do that and it's fine. Since then, things have got a little bit more robust. And that's largely because at the end of 2021, I left the Times to go and work at Vercel, and I now work on Svelte and SvelteKit full time. And so this is now my job is to make JavaScript frameworks. And as a result, me and two other people working on it, we managed to get a stable version of SvelteKit out in 2022, I want to say. Yeah, 2022. I think that's when we shipped it. And since then, we have been working on a new version of the underlying component framework, which is obviously called Svelte. Around that time, we had our first in-person conference. This was in Stockholm. This is Svelte Summit. Things were going pretty well. We had really high satisfaction levels reported from people. There we go. Tab. This is the state of JavaScript survey, which comes out every year, and you'll see that in terms of interest, which is like what frameworks do people want to use, Svelte has been at the top for the last 5 years. People really like using Svelte, it turns out. And yet, in spite of that, we decided that we were just going to junk the whole thing and basically rewrite it from scratch. And that is what we've been doing for the last year. And so I want to talk a little bit about why we would do that. Because generally speaking, the big ground up rewrite is a thing that you should never, ever, ever do. Even when it seems like a good idea, it's almost certainly not. But the reality is that since we shipped Svelte, the first version was 2016, but the first version that people actually used was in 2019. Since 2019, things hadn't really changed that much. There's been a lot of innovation in the JavaScript world. Solid came out, Qwik came out, lots of things came out. And we were just kind of doing the same thing that we've been doing for a while. And we had started to discover the limits of our approach in real applications because people were starting to use it for serious large apps. And it turns out that Svelte's core idea, which is that you can use a compiler to do a lot of the heavy lifting in your application, works really well in some cases, but falls apart in some other cases. There were some design flaws that we had discovered around, the compositional qualities of Svelte components, which also become really apparent when you're building very large applications. A lot of implementation complexity, because what Svelte is it's code that writes code. And the code that writes code is really difficult code to read and to follow. And so it was difficult to make changes to the Svelte code base. But also, like, Solid had come out and had really shown the world that signals are a primitive that lets you do reactive state in the DOM as fast, or in some cases faster, than the compiler approach that we've been very bullish on prior to that. And pretty much every other framework except for React has also embraced signals in the last few years. And we had been a little bit skeptical of the ergonomics around signals. We don't like the fact that, you know, you need to create closures. Like you can see how it works in Solid. Like you get a getter setter pair, and you have to call the setter with the getter, and you have to call the getter if you want things to update. Like it's fine. Like it makes a lot of sense, but didn't kind of feel as nice as the way that we were used to writing code. And you know, other signal implementations like Vue and Preact have a different characteristic, but similarly, we didn't feel that it quite matched our vision of what writing code should be like. So when we figured out that there was a way to get signal performance, in fact, better than the state-of-the-art signal performance, while also having the ergonomics that we want in a framework, we set about building it. And so that's been my project for the last year, along with the rest of the team. So Svelte 5, it's smaller than Svelte 4, it's faster than Svelte 4, it is more robust, you'll be able to build it for larger and more ambitious applications. And keep this to yourselves, but it's here. We're actually launching it in 2 days. Thank you. So we're also launching a new website. This is a preview of the new website, which we're going to be launching on Saturday. And I'll give you a very quick walkthrough of the website and describe like how it encapsulates what we think about, or how we think about the problem that we're solving. So our tagline is web development for the rest of us. And this really harkens back to the feeling that I had when I was first starting out, which is that this shit is too hard. Like it is still way too hard to make a fast, accessible, secure website. And I've been doing web development for a while now, and I like to think that I'm not terrible at it, but like I still kind of align myself with the tribe of people who don't really think that a lot of the stuff that comes out in the front end world is kind of meant for me. You know, like I still feel like there's a lot of complexity, a lot of like jargon, a lot of things that kind of stand in between me and the idea that I'm trying to put on the page. And so that hopefully encapsulates that philosophy. I'll just show you the homepage. This is some more photos from Stockholm, and a bunch of the people who help us make it, either by contributing code or contributing financially to our open collective. If you've used Svelte before, then you've probably seen our existing sites. We have one site for Svelte, we have one site for Svelte Kit, and we have one site for our interactive tutorial. And the consequence of that is that if you're searching for something on one thing, then like you might need to realize that you're searching on the wrong site and go somewhere else. And maybe there are broken links, because it's really hard to avoid having broken links on multiple websites. Like the search doesn't work across everything. And so now we have a single site for everything related to Svelte. Svelte Kit, the tutorial, the playground, our blog. We'll have documentation for satellite things like Veep plugin Svelte and ESLint plugin Svelte and all the rest of it soon enough. We have a bit of a design facelift. We have decided that the age of sans serif fonts on websites is over. It's done. Stop it. I'm actually curious to know if this is a me thing or an us thing. Like you see sans serif fonts like everywhere, like the Roboto and the Source Sans Pro and the Inter, and it's fine, but like when I see a really nice serif font like this, I think, yes, this is how the written word is supposed to be engaged with. Like this is, you know, pick up a newspaper or a magazine or a book. Like it's always serif type. But for some reason, the tech world, the digital world has just kind of like thrown that away as being old fashioned or something. And so now everything is sans serif, to the extent that I kind of associate sans fonts with digital things. And I don't know about you, but I associate digital things with shit that doesn't work. Whereas like the physical printed word is something that like you can hold and you can scribble on, and just kind of like feels more solid and robust to me. In the limited user testing that we've done, I've found that those of us of a more geriatric persuasion like this, but some of the people like Gen Zers, let's say, are like, it's like the Declaration of Independence. What the hell is this? So I don't know. Do people like this? Is it readable? Does it look nice? Okay, good.
Sounds like you need a toggle. Light mode, dark mode.
Maybe we've actually thought about doing that. So our body copy is EB Garamond. Our header display font is DM Serif Display. We have Fira Sans for the UI elements and some navigation accents. And for code, we are using Fira Mono, which obviously goes really well with Fira Sans. And I know a lot of you are thinking like, Rich, we don't care. Do not give a flying fuck about fonts. But we really care about this stuff. You would not believe the number of hours that the Svelte team has spent looking at different fonts and trying to come up with pairings that we really like. So we're going to make you hear about it. We'll write up a blog post describing all of our design thoughts. We actually almost spent thousands of dollars of open collective money on some fonts that were not available for free on Google Fonts, but eventually sanity prevailed. So there we are. And I guess all that remains for those of you who have no idea what I've been talking about for the last few minutes, I should actually give you a little bit of a demonstration of Svelte so that you can have some idea of whether it's relevant to what you do. So I'm just going to take you through the opening chapters of our interactive tutorial, at least until Fabian tells you that it's time to get off the stage. So this is the screen that you see when you first open the tutorial. Bump the font size up a little. Tell me if it's still too small. Essentially, a Svelte component is you write it into a .svelte file, and it's HTML. It's HTML with extra bits. And an application is just composed out of multiple of these components. So, inside here, we can add a script tag. We can add some data, like let name equals, oops, Pace University. I can't type. Right, pretty basic stuff. Obviously, you can do that in any framework. And you can use arbitrary JavaScript in here. A lot of people see templating languages and they're like, oh, I don't know about that. Like we've been here and it was a bad idea. And it was because there was like just a loss of flexibility. But modern templating languages don't have that problem. Obviously, you can also have dynamic attributes in your markup, like this. Do people still know what this is? Like, I just want to do a little gut check. I still find Rickrolls hilarious, but I don't know if people these days still know what a Rickroll is. I love this stuff. I got married last year, and this was our first dance was never going to give you up. I take it very seriously. Also, you'll see that there's a little squiggly here because images should have alt attributes. Otherwise, if you have a visual impairment, or if you're on a bad connection and the image hasn't downloaded yet, like the browser is going to display this text. So you need to have a thing that explains what it is. And it's really easy to forget this stuff. Like accessibility is super hard to get right reliably. And a framework should help make sure that you don't make easy mistakes. We can add styles to our components. I'm going to copy this over here. Copy and paste is disabled because we like you to type. Otherwise, you're not going to learn it properly. But since I'm trying to give a demo here, I'm going to disable that. I know that these days people tend to use Tailwind like actually writing CSS is like, okay, boomer. But I like Tailwind. I think Tailwind is cool. But you know, and here I can do everything with CSS. I can use nested selectors. I can use sibling combinators and all sorts of things that in some cases are extremely difficult to do with Tailwind. And so, you know, it was really kind of created to solve this problem of portability, of keeping your styles with your markup and your JavaScript. And I think that's great if you're using a framework that doesn't have scope styles. But if you do have scope styles, then like you might not need Tailwind. I don't dislike Tailwind. I think it's terrific, but personally, I don't really need it, so I don't use it. Let's talk about reactivity. Let's talk about signals. So the big departure from Svelte 4, Fabian, how am I doing for time? Okay. All right. The big departure from Svelte 4 is in the olden days, you could just do like count plus equals 1 here, and this button would work. That won't work in Svelte 5 because we want you to be explicit. We want you to say count is a piece of reactive state. It's going to change, and when it changes, I want other stuff to change in response. So we're going to annotate it. And this is what we call a rune. A rune is a kind of instruction to the compiler. You can think of it as part of the language. It looks like a function, like we're using function syntax here, but it's actually not a function. It gets compiled to something different than what you see here. You don't have to import it. When you're using Svelte, it is part of the language. And so now if I click on this, it's updating. Notice what I'm not doing. I'm not calling count. I'm not doing count.value. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just interacting it as though it's a normal variable, but it's just one that's been annotated with a rune to tell the compiler that this is reactive state. This works deeply too. So this is an array. Turn that into a reactive array. And then inside here, we can do, you know, numbers.push, numbers.length plus, well, it's really hard to type down here. And that works as you would expect. We can also derive state. We can say, you know, let total equals derived numbers.reduce. And then just sum those all together. We can put that right there in our markup, like so, and it will tot up over time. All pretty basic stuff. Obviously, you can do this with any framework, but what sets Svelte apart is that it really feels like you're just dealing with data. You're not dealing with some framework abstraction. You're just looking at the actual data itself. Under the hood, because we have the compiler between you and the code that actually runs, we're able to do some stuff that is really difficult in other frameworks. And our signals, as a result, are very memory efficient. We don't need to create a closure, for example, for each signal. The signal itself is just like kind of an ugly looking object that's very cheap to create and very cheap to interact with. And so as a result, like if you care about such things, Svelte is extremely fast. We think it's like just about the fastest mainstream framework. There's a whole bunch more stuff that I could show you here, but I'll just quickly call out universal reactivity. So again, if you'd used Svelte 4 in the past, then you know a lot of people don't like the fact that while you can do the magical reactive stuff inside your components, as soon as you want to have state that is not tied to a component, well, it doesn't work because you're back in JavaScript land. And so you need to do something a little bit different. That's not true in Svelte 5. In Svelte 5, reactivity is universal. All we need to do is turn this object here into state, and then the component that imports it can just interact with it, except, oh, there's an error because the state rune is only available inside Svelte files. So we'll just rename that, fix the import. And hey presto, we have universal fine-grained reactivity shared between multiple components, but all using the same design principles throughout your app. There's no inconsistency. There's no, am I dealing with a primitive? Am I dealing with an object? Like, am I supposed to use a ref or a reactive or a signal or a store? It's all just state in Svelte. And we think that makes your life as an application developer much easier. I could keep waffling, but honestly, like, just have a look at the tutorial when we ship it in a couple of days. This is going to be going live this Saturday. We have our virtual conference, Svelte Summit. It's going to be on YouTube on Saturday from, I actually don't know what time it starts. 9 a.m. Starts at 9 a.m. So I will be there. I would love to see some of you in the YouTube stream if you're so inclined. That's all I got. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Maybe limit your questions to the stuff related here directly, and then later on we have a discussion route for more general stuff.
Hi. For one thing, I was a React developer for a long time. I got my citizenship, by the way, because of React. But after I discovered Svelte 4, I just dropped. I quit my job and started reading your documentation. So you are
glad you didn't lose your citizenship.
Because of the sponsorship. I was a good React developer. And I just want to say thank you because you are the magician. I mean, the rune means magic symbols. And I feel like, I mean, according to the documentation, it says Svelte just turns JavaScript into reactive language. And I know that there are other frameworks, but the difference is that it's a kind of, it provides some kind of structure for computation in a way that, you know, the user interface and how all these parts around is orchestrated is awesome. So I just want to say thank you, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. That's music to our ears to hear that. Thank you.
And my question is, when I was reading Svelte 4 documentation, there was something called store, which was kind of, you know, but in Svelte 5, we don't need it, I believe, right? Because runes are already universal and reactive. And I didn't see any kind of link on your new page. So I just wanted to double check.
So the migration story is hopefully going to be pretty seamless. If you have existing Svelte 4 code, including stores, then when you install Svelte 5, it will continue to work. You don't need to migrate all of your code to use the new stuff. You can do that one component at a time. I kind of wanted to deprecate stores in Svelte 5 because, you know, you can do everything that you can do with stores with runes, with state. And it doesn't really make sense to have multiple ways of doing things. But there are other members of the team who are a little bit less impulsive than I am. And like, look, it's going to take people a while to move their stuff over. We've got to be able to support this stuff for the foreseeable future. So when Svelte 5 comes out, we will continue to support everything in Svelte 4 for a minimum of 12 months. After that point, we'll start deprecating some stuff. Stores are probably going to be around for a while. Stores are, if you've used SvelteKit, stores are kind of an integral part of SvelteKit. Like the way that you know what's happening on the page is by interacting with the page store. And we want to ship a state-based alternative to that so that you get the benefits of the fine-grained reactivity and all of that. But that's going to take a few weeks to get right. And in the meantime, people are going to continue writing stores. So it's not going to be the tutorial. Well, no, it will probably be mentioned in the tutorial, but it's not something that we're going to encourage people to do. But it's definitely something that we're going to continue to support people doing, at least until all of the popular libraries that use stores have been able to migrate, and at least until SvelteKit has come out with alternatives to stores. So yeah, they'll be around for a while, but kind of as a, the crazy uncle that we don't talk about sort of thing.
Hello, Rich, big fan. I remember when Svelte 5 came out, I remember runes weren't exactly deeply reactive, but then later on, you made a PR about proxy state, about bringing, making runes immutable by default, but making them mutable, but allowing for mutability through proxies. And I wanted to know, like, has there been any like interesting / weird edge cases that have come about by allowing for mutability, these mutable APIs?
You have no idea. So many edge cases. Yeah. So the background to that is initially we wanted this to be super simple and like super direct. Like the only way that you could modify a piece of state was if the function modifying it closed over the state itself. But it turns out that the ergonomics of that don't really work. And so when we put that into the public realm, people came back and said, this is going to make Svelte too difficult to use. And so we thought, is there a way that we can make people's lives easier? And so now, if you wrap an array in state, then you can do things like push to the array. If you wrap an object in state, then you can mutate the properties of that object and it will cause updates because the object is being replaced with a proxy. And the mutability versus immutability stuff that you talked about is like super interesting. It's stuff that like is kind of in the weeds. And so we're still kind of trying to figure out how much we want to talk about this like in the documentation. But essentially, mutating objects is bad, generally speaking. Like local mutations are okay. But like if you're a function and you receive an object and then you mutate something inside that object, then like it's gonna cause problems. Like this is the root of a lot of bugs in a lot of applications. To the extent that React, for example, just doesn't deal with mutable state at all. If you have an array and you push to that array and you do set to-dos after you've pushed to to-dos, nothing will happen. Like it won't update it because it's still referentially equal to what that thing was the previous go around. And so it just assumes that nothing has changed. And we think the ergonomics of that are not great. Like you want to be able to push to an array, but you want your data to be immutable. And so proxies are a way that you can kind of do that, but there are edge cases. I think my favorite example is what happens when you log a proxy. Like you want to inspect the value of some proxy. And the way that it works in your browser DevTools is it won't show you the data that the proxy represents. It will show you the word proxy and then like target and handler and all of this stuff, which is it's not what I want. Like I don't understand why DevTools does this. It's really useless. But if you click through to the target, then you will see the original object. And because of the guarantees that we want to provide, particularly with some of the features that we want to add to Svelte 5 after 5.0, we want to start doing some interesting stuff with like, everything everywhere all at once type multiverse mad science. And you can only do that in a world where your data is immutable so that you can make some changes to your state kind of like off screen in one universe and then merge that universe like back into to the main universe or discard it. And you can only do that if you have immutable data, if you haven't been like mucking about with the underlying object. And so our proxies don't mutate the original object. If you push to that array, then the original array that you passed in the first place, it doesn't change. It's the exact same thing that it was before. It's just kind of like a template for the proxy itself. And so as a result of that, people get super confused when they log stuff out. Like, why is this not reflecting my updated data? To the extent that we've, every time you console.log something, we will intercept that and kind of snapshot the data and then print the snapshot and then print a warning that says you probably wanted to use a snapshot rather than the actual proxy, and then we'll log the proxy. And it works pretty well in practice, but it took us a long time to find the right ergonomics that allow you to inspect your data in a normal, sane, idiomatic way, but also allow you to have the beautiful ergonomics of mutation with the the robust semantics of immutability. And that's been a huge challenge. Another one is what happens when something mutates some data that it doesn't own. So, say you have a component up here which creates a reactive object, and then it passes it as a prop to another component. Well, that component could just change the property of that object. And that's exactly the thing that we talked about that is bad and that leads to confusion, is if things start mutating objects that they don't own. You call it spooky action at a distance. Like the effects of that are really hard to predict. And so we have some kind of hacky, but I'm quite proud of it anyway, logic inside Svelte that will, at dev time, so that you don't pay the cost in production, it will discover that the mutation is happening far from where it was actually declared. So component A declares it, component B mutates it. Svelte will say, component B is not supposed to be mutating data that it doesn't own. We'll let you do it, but we're going to warn you. We're going to yell at you and tell you to stop doing it until you explicitly make that object a binding between those two components. And it's taken us like a super long time to figure out how to do that. Like at one point we were trying to implement that with another layer of proxies so that everything would have to go through the mutation detection proxy before it got to the underlying proxy. But then we had problems with referential equality, and things didn't work the same in dev and in prod. And like, this is why it's taken us 15 months to make this thing, is because when you try and square the circle of all of these different constraints that we've put upon ourselves, like it's hard. It's taken us a long time to get there, but I'm pretty happy with where we've landed, and I'll be interested to see what edge cases people discover now that it's stable and in the wild. Hopefully not too many.
Hi. So my question was, when you started on the journey, what was it like starting? And did you had already planned out already in the head, or like did it change over time and then you weren't like expecting, oh, this is different than what I had?
The Svelte 5 journey specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a vague idea of, like, we knew that we wanted it to be better, obviously. We were keenly aware of the flaws in Svelte 3 and 4. More so, I think, than most of the people actually using it. Like, if you're exposed to something every day and you're responsible for it, then all you can see eventually is the stuff that's bad. And so we knew that we wanted things to be different, but we didn't know exactly what the solutions were. We had an inkling that signals were going to be part of it. And so we started doing some sketches about like what that could look like what the code that futuristics felt could be. But nothing really gelled, if I'm honest, for quite some time. Like, I think we went through something like 50 designs of how to declare state, for example. And we're happy with where we landed, but like along the way, we tried a lot of things that didn't work well with TypeScript, or wasn't going to be all that performant, or was going to have dev prod discrepancies, or you name it. Like, everything we tried had some kind of flaw, and it was only through a process of exploring the entire solution space exhaustively, and to the point that like we were genuinely upset with each other. Like, we're going, like, people would present an idea and then other people would be like, it doesn't really work because of this. And then people would get like upset that their idea wasn't the right one. And then someone else would come in and it's like, well, that's what I said last week. And it got kind of fractious, honestly. But eventually it started to come into focus, and things have been pretty much settled, I would say, for the last 6 months or so. And it's really just been a question of implementation. But no, we did not have a vision of what it was going to be like at the start. It took a long time, a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears, and trying and discarding a huge amount of stuff before we settled on something that we actually want to ship and put our names to.
When you started the work on 5, did you know what you were sort of targeting
I mean, it took 15 months to get where you're at, but when you started at the very beginning where you're like, we know we have to redo stores and reactive, was that like the core of how you started it? Or what was like the beginning of working on 5 to like, we need to go here? And in that realm, what's going to be in 6?
What were our constraints when we started? It's so hard to cast your mind back and remember what we thought was important then versus now. There were definitely a lot of things that didn't make the cut. Like we had a lot of ideas that have been put off into the future. Getting rid of stores was definitely high up on that list. Having 2 ways of managing state in what is essentially like all a rendering framework is a thing for managing state. And if like you have multiple approaches, then that's no good. So unifying that was priority 1. But beyond that, yeah, I struggle to remember. Maybe if I'd had a little bit more sleep, or if I'd reviewed some of the conversations around that time, I'd be able to give you a more thorough answer. But it really was just like fix all of the things that are wrong with it now. As for what's going to be in Svelte 6, I mean, I gave a little bit of a hint with the Everything Everywhere All at Once stuff. Have people seen that film? It's really good. It's a terrific film. And that multiverse concept is in React, and I believe Solid 2.0 is going to have some version of this. And essentially, it gives you a way to coordinate asynchronous work. And you know, as Mishka said, frameworks aren't necessarily that good at coordinating async work. It's taken a few years before we all kind of understand what the problem looks like. Like, you know, the React team was demoing solutions to this problem in 2018, and it took them years to ship it. And it's not because the React team are dummies, it's because it's a hard problem. And we've decided that we want to take on that hard problem, but that's going to be a post 5.0 thing. There are some other things that we don't super love about Svelte 3 and 4. Actions are something that, you know, there's a better design waiting out there. Some of the stuff around transitions and animations, it's a little bit too hard to coordinate, like layout changes with transitions and animations and all of that stuff. Like, feel like that should be baked into the framework. And so there's a few things like that. But at the same time, we've also got to work on Svelte Kit, because there's a lot of things that are not really that easy to do today in Svelte Kit, like dealing with WebSockets, for example. Having a high fidelity local dev environment, if you're deploying to, you know, Cloudflare workers, you want to be running workerd locally on your machine so that you can experience what the environment that the code is going to be running in when it ships. So we're going to be splitting our time between the things that I mentioned in Svelte 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and updating Svelte Kit for the new world. And along the way, I expect us to discover things that make sense in Svelte 5 that didn't previously, that inform how we think about Svelte Kit, like how we think about the ideal way to load data, and so on. So predicting what Svelte 6 and Svelte Kit 3 and 4 are going to look like is a bit of a mug's game. We don't really know. We have some ideas, and we think it's going to be a lot of fun getting there, but I don't want to make any more predictions at this point.